Welcome, everyone. This is Mike Meriton, and thank you for joining this panel advocated by Ernst & Young, or EY, and it's entitled Data Sharing in a Post-Pandemic World, and it's moderated by Stuart Wallace. So Stuart, I will turn it to you to introduce the topic and your panel, and thank you for joining the DataVision event.
Thank you very much, Mike. It's a pleasure to be here. So yes, thank you everyone for turning up to this panel, data sharing in a post-pandemic world. I'll introduce the panel in a minute, but if I start with some scene setting on this. I do think data sharing has been a mainstream challenge since GDPR days, really, but the pandemic has accelerated the requirement to share data. And I think it's also raised public awareness of the key themes and the key considerations there. So I think there are impacts here. It's clear that the amount of data to be shared is dramatically increasing as we all bring forward digital initiatives. And, arguably, that's normally a good thing because most people who are looking to share data are looking to improve outcomes to all their stakeholders, whether it's examples such as the Commonwealth Bank of Australia sharing data with an airline to make their shared customers better offers, better experiences, or whether it's a bank like Barclays sharing data with Amazon in Germany to provide customer credit at the point of purchase, or indeed whether it's all many initiatives that are going on to combat financial crime through sharing data and developing more intelligence-led insights. The technical barriers to data sharing are also largely, arguably, disappearing. Initiatives like the CDMC will certainly help here, and we heard that in the opening sessions of this conference. But even with this maturing capacity, this greater understanding and articulation of the controls that help manage data sharing, there are still legal, regulatory, and ethical considerations which are presenting challenges across most organizations that we work with. Now, we did find in 2020, EY ran a global consumer privacy survey across the world, and that did show that the pandemic was impacting here. COVID-19 had not changed the fundamental attitudes of consumers towards their data privacy. They were still very concerned when sharing personal data with that it would be securely handled, that it would be controlled, and that they could trust the organization they were sharing the data with. But we did find that altruism is an increasingly powerful force in the data value exchange. If people are sharing data for the common good, then they were more willing to do that. And half of the consumers that we surveyed agreed that the pandemic has made them more willing to part with their personal data if they know it is contributing to a research effort and or a community wellness. And the sort of questions that we want to look at in this panel are whether these attitudes will stick, will they advance? What approaches are our panel taking to address the challenges of data sharing? What are the challenges of data sharing still? And what is going to shift this consideration in the future? Will, for example, personal carbon data usage start being a commonly shared data asset, a personal data asset as well? So with that as a sort of preliminary introduction to the topic, let's get on to the panel. And I'd like to start by asking each of the panel members to introduce themselves and also just talk about their personal approaches to data sharing. So Eva, can I start with you?
Sure, yeah. Hi everyone, my name is Eva Murray. I'm a senior evangelist with Snowflake here in the EMEA region, based out of London. And my personal approach to data sharing, I probably share more data than I should. And I was just thinking about the type of data I share. It's not just that personal information. Of course, I try to keep that as secure as possible. But I think it's basically anything we put out there on the internet, any comment, any like, that all tells companies something about us. And I can definitely tell based on the advertisements I get that it's working for them, and for my wallet, not so much. So I think we'll get into it in a bit more detail, but I'll leave it at that for now.
Thanks, Eva. Shane.
Hi, everyone. My name is Shane Lamont, and I'm the head of the Data and Architecture Office for HSBC UK. And I'm in two minds about data sharing. I ran anti-money laundering technology for HSBC, and I've seen firsthand the positive benefits that we can get in protecting our customers and preventing fraud if data is appropriately and sensibly shared. And yet I, like many others, may have subscribed to a newsletter at some time in the past, and as a result, I get continuous streams of emails and offers, some of which are relevant and some of which are not. So I'm kind of mixed about the personal feelings. It's lots of value that you can get if done properly, but it's still, for me personally, a bit of a hesitation in every time I click accept, because I want to get the information I need. And I'm sure we'll cover that more later. Stuart.
Thanks, Shane. Matt.
Thanks, Stuart. Hi, everybody. Matt Worley, I'm a partner in EY's FS Law business. I've built a data privacy and digital ethics practice, and now run our privacy technology business, which actually we're building largely to deal with issues around data sharing. I'm similar to Shane in that I've got sort of two approaches to data sharing. I'm quite happy to share it if I feel like I'm getting benefit from it, and I know that's a topic that we'll come back to over the next 20 minutes. But I also get really unnerved by the ability of websites to track what I might want to buy based on what I've just bought, and I find that I'm getting worn down a bit by cookie management things, and just start clicking accept. But that's a really bad personal behaviour that I certainly don't advocate to people watching.
Thanks, Matt. So if we talk about our own sort of personal experiences in data sharing, perhaps from our more professional experiences, what are the key sort of challenges that we face when looking at data sharing initiatives? Shane, again, perhaps if you start on this one.
So I think in any complex organization, especially when you're dealing with customer data, trust is paramount. And you have to say within the law and the regulations at all times, which means that there's the conflict between how quickly you want to move to provide new products and services to customers. But on the other hand, making sure that you do not progress more quickly than you have the permission, the right, and the obligations to look after your customers' data. So that trade-off is something that's very important to us at HSBC. And where we have a decision to make, we always err on the side of caution, which might mean that we take more time and care and attention than we would like to, given the speed that we want to move at, but we always make sure we do whatever is required to preserve the trust. And that challenge is therefore the challenge between the trade-off of speed of delivery and protecting the trust of the customer, but we always focus on containing the trust. That's so important from us as an organization.
Yeah, and I think it's how that trust is going to be demonstrated. Perhaps Matt, I know you've spent quite a bit of time looking at that and the technologies you're developing.
Yeah, so we did a CEO survey back end of last year, early this year. So we know that 68% of CEOs are planning significant investment in technology and data. They're not doing that for no reason. They're doing that because they see data as a way of generating revenue for their business. Over the years, we see some really funky and quite scary ideas about how to leverage data to build businesses, which is possibly why of the same group of CEOs, only 34% think that customers trust them fully with their data. That's a huge gap to fill if you actually want to start to build products and services that use personal data to deliver benefit to customers. They have to trust you with what you're doing. I see it very much as initially firms across financial services and other sectors understanding first what they can use data for, so what does the law allow, and secondly, what should they use data for, so what's their ethical, what's their appetite for different scenarios, and what are the ethics attached around those scenarios. So always erring on the side of caution is one approach. Not all firms can take or are able to take that approach, so understanding and being able to articulate the balance of risk that you're taking, and then finally how you can control and manage that risk. So what structures and operations do you have within your organization to really manage the risk of using data in certain ways? Firstly, managing it at an organizational level, and secondly, matching to customers. So finding a way of moving beyond, do you consent to using data for this thing, and then that running for a year, to just-in-time consent that is for a specific value transaction, maybe bringing consent management into more of an investment management type of sphere where you've got different risk profiles. I'll let you do this if there's a clear benefit. I might let you do that if there's some benefit, and just starting to work through different ethics trade-offs to work out how do you actually match customer appetite. So you build on that trust, develop the trust first, and then build on it to give value to customers, data subjects, as well as to the business, because you have to grow as a commercial enterprise.
Yeah, I mean that's very much, you're having to expand your capabilities, you're having to expand your thinking about this before you can actually address that trust challenge. I wonder, just closing off on challenges, Eva, if there's been any other sort of challenges to data sharing that from your experience in the Snowflake world that are still...
Yeah, I think one thing that I've seen a lot of, and I've worked with a lot of practitioners over the years, especially on analytics and data science, is just the technical challenges of actually sharing data effectively. So trust, I totally agree with what the others have said, but I think also the sharing it in a way that's efficient, that is secure, that is something you can trust as well, so that technical process, but also that is workable on an everyday basis. And I don't think I've met a company that hasn't grappled with the whole moving files around and oops, somebody sent it to the wrong email address and that kind of stuff. So that's a big challenge that I've spoken to a lot of people in companies about, how do we realize this from a technical perspective and make it work within the architecture that we've established.
Okay, so if we sort of look at some of those challenges, you know, I was reading the other day, there was a Gartner survey from last year that 5% of any organization, any sector, 5% of any organizations worldwide, less than 5% of organizations worldwide actually look for trusted data sources before they start their data sharing initiatives, which I do think is a bit extraordinary, because trusted data sources are the sort of thing that have been being developed for the past, well, quite a few years, to be honest. It's surprising that's still something that people are struggling with, perhaps. What sort of approaches are people taking then to address those challenges? Matt, again, let's start with you.
So I think data models, updating data models to understand at a domain level what should the data model look like, and where do you get specific aspects of elements of data from, so that you know that if you're getting it, you identify what a trusted source is. And it feels quite basic, but I understand it's very difficult, particularly with legacy architecture that exists. Tracking permissions, the worry for me from a privacy perspective particularly is tracking permissions with data. So data is ingested into your organization, you at some point knew what that data was for, and at some point told a customer what it was for, and as it gets morphed through from system to system and use to use, then the permissions get lost with it, so you end up in a position where you're using data for a purpose that is so far beyond the original one that there's no way of tracking it back. And the ability, I think, on legacy architecture to manage that, I mean, it's got to be limited, and that's got to be one of the reasons for that 5% figure.
Shane, any thoughts on approaches that you've seen work that you're developing that perhaps you're anticipating to help address either the trust or the tracking of data, the ethics of pieces of?
So I think that with the volume of data that we're now dealing with, it's impossible to ever hope to do this manually. 10, 15 years ago, you may have been able to have, have 10 or 20 corporate databases. Now in large complex organizations, you're possibly dealing with tens of millions of data elements as they flow through the organization. So automation of your data identification, going into a database that you may not have documentation for because it was written 10, 15 years ago, and been able to scan that to identify where you have personally identifiable information. That's the way the future has to go, because it's impossible to rely on written documentation given the complexity that we had. And also when data moves between systems, to hope that you document it in a Microsoft Word document and then use that to trace where the data has gone. I believe that the only way of doing this reliably and to have any chance of dealing with the increasing complexity is to look at automation and artificial intelligence tools that help with the identification, the traceability, and the inference of data, so that data coming into a system and data coming out of the system, the difference between those two can often imply the data that you're creating. And therefore, the data that you're creating may actually be more sensitive than the data that you're building it on. But automation, artificial intelligence, and the ability to deal with volume are really the key things that we're not only looking at, but believe are inevitable that they will be needed in the future.
Yeah, and ironically, actually, some of those approaches will be relying on written documentation more so than traditional sort of committees to consider, do we do it this way or do we do it that way, and coming out of random answers depending who's attending the committee. Whereas I think that sort of sense of precedent, looking at a use case and saying, okay, we've done this before in this environment. These are the mitigations we put in place to manage the trust, to embed the trust in that data sharing use case. That's the sort of thing that those sort of techniques that you talked about can certainly bring to life. Eva, from the Snowflake perspective, I'd imagine that controls on data sharing, given that you enable so much data sharing, and if I was being controversial here, I'd say you're part of the problem. But no, it's what are you bringing to help control data sharing, help manage it, and help deliver it safely and with trust, I guess, which is what we're coming to in this panel.
Yeah, we've talked a lot about the trust, and I think that's really paramount, as we can all agree. And it's about having that centralized governance and control and security, and having the user access managed centrally. And what we do is, so let's say you're the organization that is sharing data, you don't actually move the data to the other organization or the other users. You keep it under your control. You simply give them access. And when they access your data in the database, to them, it looks and feels like they're just using another table in their own environment because it's connected to their account, but the data never moves. So that's a really important safeguard there, that organizations don't have to let go of their data. And then in return, the consumers of the data don't need to worry about hosting all this additional data in their own environment. They just access it when they need it. And I want to add from my own standpoint as well, that I think when it comes to that whole control and management of data sharing, we also need to ask ourselves quite regularly, do we need all this data? Is there a point at which we say, well, we've collected all of this data and we've never used it. Maybe it's time to get rid of it, give people the right to be forgotten, or to at least have some of their data forgotten, and to kind of eliminate that. And one more component I want to add before we move to the next question is about the people and the processes, and really ensuring that while we can automate and we can safeguard a lot at the technical side, that we also train our people in how to work with data from an ethical perspective and being responsible data citizens in what they use and how they use it, so that before things even are analyzed or built into algorithms, there are considerations of, is this the right thing to do? Should I be doing this? And where does that lead? So I did want to throw that in there, the people side of things as well.
Yeah, and I think that takes us back to the sort of the idea of whether the past 18 months have raised awareness of that. Have they changed the expectations on data privacy, and what is upcoming that we think will also change data sharing? Is it new products? Is it the climate situation? Is it the expectations of that? Are there other elements out there that we think will continue to keep this as a public priority? Perhaps Shane, starting with you.
So I think one of the things that has changed in the last 2 years for data sharing and what are you doing with my data is as a result of the pandemic, especially in contact tracing apps. 3 years ago, people were probably generally or maybe aware of the fact that their phone had a location service in it. But the usage of those, which is now very understandable and in the public mindset, I believe means that data sharing is something that the typical person on the street, if such a person exists, is at least aware of in a much higher level of detail than they were pre the pandemic, to the extent that they're making decisions as to which applications, what does this application do with my data? Now, we've still a long way to go, but certainly from a person on the street perspective, the pandemic, I think, has raised that level of awareness much, much higher than it did previously.
Yeah, Eva, what about your perspective? Do you think there's upcoming challenges that will raise this further, that will change people? Do you think we've reached peak privacy?
Probably not yet. There are companies or situations continue to surprise us, I think, with where this can go and maybe shouldn't go. But yeah, I agree that the pandemic has made a lot more people really conscious of that there is, their data being shared through apps, etc. But I think there's also the opportunity for collaboration around data, and that's also something that came from the pandemic, where suddenly researchers and scientists around the world are really forced to work together more, and they're seeing the benefits and they come up with solutions faster. And I think it's also going to drive some innovation when people realize, okay, it doesn't just have to be virus data. It could also be something about a product or a service that they're working on. Because a lot of the time, people within the organization, but also in the broader ecosystem, so let's say an organization and their partners, suppliers, vendors, they actually try to answer the same kind of questions. And I think if you can throw more brains at the same problem, but have them in a room, so to speak, and working together on that, I think we can really leverage that to drive innovation and come up with better products, with new products that is supported by data sharing at large. Yeah.
Thanks. There has been a question specifically for you, Eva, just before we go to Matt for the last word on this, specifically for you about, from Paul there, about is it possible to share data in Snowflake tenants in different regions without moving the data? So I guess virtualization of data, for example, an EU tenant and an APAC tenant. Could you share that data? Is that possible?
Yeah, so that's a very specific question. Thanks for asking that. I think so, but I would need to refer back to my colleagues, because I don't want to give an answer that just doesn't really hit the nail on the head. So let me get back to that.
I'm sure we can make the arrangements on that. And then finally, just Matt, in the last minute here, what do you think? Where are we going to be in 5 years on this, on data sharing? Is it going to be more publicly acceptable, or is it still going to be?
It's going to be more difficult. So we know there's a Gartner survey somewhere that says that at the moment, about 15% of the world is covered by modern global privacy laws, so GDPR type laws. That's going to increase to 84% by the end of 2023. And that is a seismic shift in legal codification of privacy rules, all following a GDPR type standard, and also public awareness and knowledge across the world of what data privacy means to individuals. There's going to be no let up from individuals around that. The headlines around Facebook, the headlines, huge news. And so for firms that need to use data to generate revenue, to share data between each other, to leverage customer data to do stuff, it always comes back to how do you ensure that whatever you're doing is legal and ethical, and also that your decisions are traced back to law and regulation in a robust way.
Okay, thank you very much. We are at time there, but thank you to the panel. I think we've covered trust, and that last point there, that we think we've seen it all, but there's still more regulation to manage in this. Let's hope technology and good data management can help you. Hand over to Mike now. Thanks to the panel.
Yeah, hey, Stuart and all of our panelists, thank you very much. Thank you to the EY team for preparing this discussion. And certainly, Stuart, if people want to learn more, I think we have an update slide that Lamont can share on contact, and we'll also publish this out to everyone post the event. So thank you for everyone at this point. Lamont, if you could bring up the final couple slides to give the audience what their next choices are. Awesome. There's the contact information. If you'd like to reach out to Stuart, swallace1 at ukey.com. Thank you, Stuart, again, to your team. And here are the choices for the next panel. You can visit the Palantir panel, which is the data-driven future of ESG decision-making, or your choice is to visit the Orteca panel on trusting data to drive decisions and leveraging the DCAM framework, just go to your agenda tab, click on the session you prefer, and you'll be right in right now. And again, thanks to all of our panelists and to the EY team.